So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story.
So as you listen to me tell this story in the background, you can allow yourself to get comfortable, to close your eyes and begin to relax comfortably asleep. And I don't know whether you'll relax deeper asleep to the sound of my voice or the spaces between my words, but as you drift comfortably asleep, you can just listen to me in the background and become absorbed in the story. And there was a young and interesting, incredibly creative girl, and she had the most incredible imagination. And she was sitting outside one day in her back garden, resting on a bench, looking out over her back garden. She could see the back of her house. She could hear rustling leaves of the trees in the garden, the way they moved in the breeze. She could see the way the grass was swaying and moving, and smell the flowers in the garden. And she found this so deeply relaxing and comforting, to know this was her home, somewhere she felt safe and secure, somewhere she enjoyed being. And as she relaxed in her garden, so she lay back on that bench and watched the way clouds moved across the sky, the way shadows moved across her, and the way the sun would come out again. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to relax deeper. And as she did, she could notice the way that as clouds passed across the sun, everything would seem darker under her closed eyelids, and she would feel cooler on her face and cheeks, and then down across her body. And then as the clouds passed, so she would feel the warmth of the sun passing across her face, her cheeks. She would notice under her eyelids that things got a little lighter, and feel that warmth passing down the body, the arms, the legs. And with each passing of the shade and the light, she could feel herself drifting deeper and more comfortably into an experience. And as she drifted deeper, more comfortably into the experience, she started to have this sense like she was standing in a building she felt comfortable in, but that wasn't familiar to her. And in the corner of the building, the corner of the room she was in, was a bird cage with a bird in it. And she walked over to that bird cage and watched that bird as it leapt from one place to another, as it occasionally flew around inside the cage and chirped and cheeped in that cage, and ate some food and drank some water. And while she watched that bird, she wondered if it wondered about being free, and what it might do and where it might go if it was, and whether it was aware that it wasn't. And she gave this some deep thought. And while she was deep in thought, wondering this, she walked through this building and through the door leading outside. And she walked out into a garden that felt comfortable yet unfamiliar. She walked through that garden, and at the end of the garden she could see a cave. And she was curious, she loved exploring. She had a deep sense of curiosity and adventure and wonder. And she walked towards that cave, and she could feel the way the warmth of the sun was on her face, her body, and then the coolness as clouds passed across the sun. And she reached the cave, and she saw that on the entrance to this cave was an old torch in a frame on the edge of the cave, and it was lit and flickering, and she was curious who lit it, why it was flickering. But she decided to take that torch and to walk into the cave, and as she did so, she noticed how the sound changes, how footsteps start echoing, the sound of the occasional drip of water in the distance, and the way the flickering light from the flame on the torch dances around the cave walls and the floor as she walked deeper and more comfortably into the cave. And the cave was initially like a long tunnel, but it then opened up into a cavern. And the cavern was so large that the torch couldn't light the ceiling or the walls or the back wall. And she felt a sense of wonder, of curiosity, of excitement and intrigue as she walked deeper into this cave. And initially this cave, this cavern, seemed very empty. But then she noticed on the ground that there were some footprints, and so she followed those footprints. And the footprints led her towards what looked like a small room inside this cavern. And so she walked to that small room, opened a door that led into that small room, and was surprised to see somebody sat there in a meditative position with their eyes closed, breathing slowly, calmly, comfortably, as if they're in their own world. And she quietly walked in. and they spoke to her and said, "Take a seat," as if her wandering in was perfectly natural and normal and expected. And she took a seat, crossed her legs, and the person said, "Close your eyes." And so she closed her eyes. And they said, "Just breathe. Breathe in and breathe out." That's it, making each out-breath longer than each in-breath as you relax deeper and more comfortably. And she followed along with curiosity and could feel herself relaxing deeper. She felt so safe and comfortable, like there was a connection with whoever this person was, and yet she didn't know who they were. And she had dreamt all sorts of things in the past. She dreamt of exploring lands full of dinosaurs. She dreamt of exploring space. She dreamt of meeting her heroes. She dreamt of meeting people she knows in her dreams. But she'd never dreamt this before, and she followed along, and the person continued that as you continue to drift and dream and breathe in that special way, so you will relax deeper and more comfortably into the experience. And as you relax deeper and more comfortably into the experience, so you will begin to rise up in consciousness and discover something incredible. And then the person went silent for a while, and as the person was silent, so their mind deepened, and they began to have this sense of drifting and floating. And they found themselves to be beginning to see something forming in their mind's eye, almost like a whole new reality, discovering something forming in their mind's eye, discovering themselves on a spaceship, and they could see through the small windows of the spaceship as they floated within the spaceship that spaceship was heading towards a vast spaceship in front of them. And she was excited and curious about what that spaceship was. And the person was with her here in space. And the spaceship floated to the larger spaceship. And both had a synchronized spinning as this spaceship flew towards an opening in the large spaceship and flew through that opening. And then the person with her pressed a few buttons and the ship landed itself inside this huge ship. And then they asked her to come with them, and excitedly and with curiosity she did, and they left the ship onto the larger ship, and there seemed to be no one around, and on this larger ship there seemed to be gravity, where there was none as they approached the ship. Although she did seem to feel lighter than she knows she normally feels. And they walked through a door and started exploring this ship. And it was as she imagined a spaceship would be. There was lots of grey, lots of metal, and she couldn't see any windows. And they walked down a corridor, and then pushed a button to open a door, to walk into a room, and the door slid open with the sound of that sliding. They walked into a room and explored around the room. They ascended some stairs. Before eventually finding a much larger door, and they walked through that door, where they discovered that this ship had either a vast window in this room or a giant screen that looked like a window. And out of that vast window, it looked like it was looking down on the planet Earth, like this ship was in orbit circling the Earth. And she looked out the window and she could see the country her home is in. She could see storms over some places, wispy cloud in others. And vast amounts of blue. And she was so transfixed looking down at the earth. It wasn't even crossing her mind to explore anything else. And it was almost like time stood still while she stood here. She was just in a deep state of amazement, wonder, excitement, curiosity, gaining this perspective on the planet she lives on. And then the person with her called her over to some consoles, and she went over to the consoles, and they were pressing different buttons. And up on a screen, she could see information that said about where this ship came from, that were records of those who owned this ship, and about those who owned this ship being a long-lost ancient civilization that explored the galaxy and would find habitable worlds, and then search for those habitable worlds which seemed to show signs of life. And they would set up these research stations that could monitor that life and the progress of the life from the orbit of the planet. And compared to Earth lives, these aliens had significantly extended lives. They led very slow lives, and as such, they led very long lives. Lives that lasted what in Earth times would be millennia. And so they had a different concept of time to us. They could spend 500,000 years of Earth years watching humanity become what it became. And to them, that wouldn't feel like a great deal of time. It would feel like a few years of their time. And the girl found it really curious, the idea of these really long lives and how that makes different periods of time feel like different types of experience. And then after they would monitor a civilization grow, they would monitor the life on a planet grow and develop. They would leave research stations around any relevant place that might be worth coming back to, monitoring again in the future. Before using local resources, creating new ships to go out and explore other places, knowing that they can come back and visit, and that the research centres would continue to monitor and transmit data, even if there's no one physically present. And this girl found this deeply fascinating, being deeply curious about how she's come up with this kind of dream she's never had before, and wondering whether her dreams are ever linked to anything real, whether in reality she's dreaming about being up on a spaceship looking down on the planet, where down on that planet perhaps she's lying there, drifting and dreaming about being up on a spaceship looking down on a planet. And that maybe there's an element of truth or reality to it. Maybe she dreams the past, present or future. And at her young age she was already having these insightful thoughts about what things could mean, about the nature of time, of reality. And she looked forward to a future where she could work on some of these ideas when she's grown up. And then she heads back with this person to their ship, and the ship leaves this large ship. Then as it travels back towards the earth, she finds herself coming around in that room in the cave, with the person talking to her, telling her to breathe the opposite to how she was breathing, with the in-breaths being just slightly longer than the out-breaths, to help her to reorientate back to wakefulness. And she was curious about the whole experience and wondered whether she would dream this again in the future. And she found her way back out of that dream to just being aware that she was just lying on a bench in her back garden with waves of darkness and slight coolness as shadows as the clouds passed over the sun, and then waves of light and warmth as the sun revealed itself from behind the clouds. And she just felt deeply relaxed there on that bench, and decided she wanted to explore the creativity of her mind even further, to explore the positivity that she can create, the wonder, the deep curiosity. And so she opened her eyes, got off the bench, walked across the garden to a swinging chair at the back of the garden that was just out of the sun, but just in the nice cool breeze. And she stretched out and relaxed across that chair. And as it swung left and right, left and right, she noticed her breathing falling in time with that gentle swinging and swaying of the chair, and noticed herself drifting and floating comfortably and deeply asleep, where she let herself drift and dream some more, deeper and deeper, with curiosity and wonder, and relaxing to those sounds in the garden.